Hi there and welcome back to the garden. To start today's video, we've got a fun fact about my garden. It is currently mid-May and today is going to reach 95 degrees. Summer. Which is why today I want to share a few tips about how to help your garden thrive when it feels like the sun is out to personally get you. The first of which I learned from more experienced gardeners in our area that gets very hot. In recent years, it has become trendy. We'll call it trendy. It has become trendy to advise new gardeners to just prune the heck out of the lower foliage, out of the leaves on their young plants, in particular tomato plants. The thing is I don't think that's very good advice in any climate. I totally get it. The idea is that you're helping stave off early foliage diseases by removing the amount of splashback from the soil to the leaves. Makes sense, but I don't think it's actually all that effective. And in hot climates, I think it's actually really counterproductive. And the reason is, this almost sounds a little bit silly to say out loud, but these leaves are not superfluous. The plant's not just growing them for no reason. These leaves serve a purpose. They help protect the vulnerable, fragile stem of that young plant. And in addition to that, they help shade out the base of the plant where that stem meets the soil and reduce the amount of moisture loss that you're gonna see through evaporation on those really hot days. So regardless of where you live, I would definitely rethink or double think whether or not it's actually beneficial to remove these lower leaves. And we'll do a full video on pruning tomatoes here soon, a bit of a passion of mine. Subscribe if you want to check that out. But if you live in a really hot climate, I would go ahead and say, probably don't do it. Go ahead and let that plant keep its lower leaves, let them shade out the base of the plant, let them shade out the stem until they become damaged and yellow and dry. And at that point, you can go ahead and safely remove them. When you're growing in a really hot location, you don't have the luxury of thinking of it as one long summer growing season. You actually need to break it up into 3 seasons. You've got your late spring, early summer season, and you're gonna get a nice harvest in there as long as you get your plants in early enough and you get them nice and healthy to start. Then you're gonna have your midsummer zenith where things are just brutally, uncomfortably, miserably hot. And your plants are probably going to be very unproductive, or they may even just go into a complete dormant state or a semi-dormant state. And then you're gonna move into late summer, early fall, and then once again, you're gonna have a nice productive flush, a nice good harvest. Now there are 2 ways to actually implement this in a practical sense. The first way with things like, say, these tomatoes, particularly indeterminate tomatoes, is you can just try and keep them healthy or healthy-ish or at least alive during that summer season, the height of summer. Wow, the chickens are driving me insane. Gonna have to let them out here in a second. Now the second tactic is actually growing multiple sets of plants for each one of those 3 miniature growing season. And that works really well with plants that naturally sort of decline in productivity a month or 2 after they start fruiting. So the classic examples of this are gonna be things like zucchini and cucumber. You can successively grow them or succession crop them by growing, say, one early on in mid-spring and then removing it as things get really hot, trying to grow one in that mid-summer period, knowing that maybe it's not gonna be the healthiest of plants, but maybe you'll get a little bit something out of it, and then growing a new plant as the summer heat sort of starts to taper off and you go into fall. Okay, remember how in our first tip we talked about getting a good harvest in before the full brunt of summer kicks in that first initial season between late spring and early summer? Well, one of the best ways to actually do that is to take a page out of the book of northern gardeners and grow fast maturing varieties. Varieties like this Dunha variety of zucchini that will actually mature in as little as 47 days, or this green machine zucchini that we are growing in the front yard, which will mature in as little as 45 days. If you're a gardener who is accustomed to buying your seeds at places like the big box store, you are going to be absolutely amazed when you make the switch to buying from specialty seed companies or seed stores, places like MI Gardener or Johnny's, and I'll link those below, because they have varieties in just about every type of popular vegetable plant that are going to produce so much quicker than you're used to. I really like Sun Gold for an early maturing cherry tomato. Everyone likes Sun Gold. That's not exactly a unique choice, but it produces really early in the season. For eggplant, I am a huge fan of the Japanese variety Millionaire. It produces super fast, really productive as well. I think it's an awesome variety. For cucumbers, you're actually spoiled for choice. This year we are growing a variety called Corinto that we got from Johnny's, which is very early, but there's also a lot of just very fast growing pickling cucumbers out there. There's some fast growing bush cucumbers out there. Pretty much whatever type of cucumber you want, you're just gonna wanna look for something with the word early in it, and you're probably gonna find what you need. Hey there, sorry for the interruption. Shameless request. If you're enjoying this video, would you mind hitting like for me real quick? Who knows, maybe it will help help get seen by another hot weather grower who would appreciate these tips as well. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and get back to the garden. I went to go start this next section and I remembered my coffee, but not a chair. Priorities. If you live in a really hot location and you want to do some container gardening, go ahead and skip the standard potting soil. Standard potting soil is created for the average use case, and really hot locations where you're getting into triple digits regularly is not the standard use case. That potting soil is designed to freely drain moisture, which is great normally, right? You don't want your plant's roots sitting in moisture. The problem is when you're getting into those high 90s and triple digits every day for months at a time, you actually need that medium to retain that moisture for as long as possible. Now, don't get me wrong, you don't want to just throw your plants into clay and create a glumpy, muddy mess. What you want to do is actually create a DIY mixture that contains higher proportions of things like sphagnum peat moss or coco coir, if you're comfortable using those. Or if you're not comfortable using those, things like compost or things like vermiculite. Try and get your vermiculite on sale though, it is really, really expensive. And the reason is, all 4 of those ingredients are moisture retention elements. They help keep moisture in that soil mix for longer. And on the flip side, you want to use less of things like perlite and sand because those ingredients help drain out moisture quicker. If for whatever reason a DIY mix isn't in the cards for you, it's okay. You can actually find at the big box store high moisture retention potting mixes, and honestly, they work pretty well. They basically just have really high levels of vermiculite in them. If you live somewhere with brutally hot summers, the classic advice on the back of all the seed packets to plant your summer plants in full sun is incomplete. We won't call it incorrect, we'll call it incomplete. And the reason for that is not that you shouldn't utilize your full sun location. That's what all of the tips in this video are for, right? Making the most out of those full sun locations, but because you can probably get away with planting your full sun plants in partial or even full shade. Now, I personally have had pretty good success growing things like cherry tomatoes, particular varieties of cherry tomatoes, pickling cucumbers, hot peppers, and even winter squash like pumpkins in very shady locations. And I'm not talking a little dappled shade, I'm talking about underneath an oak tree canopy or beneath a giant 20-foot hedge right up next against that hedge. And I actually get a decent harvest. Is it as good of a harvest as something in a more optimal location? No, but it's not bad. We all know how important mulch is for keeping water in the soil and for keeping weeds out of the soil. But what I have found is for gardeners who are new to really hot climates, and I'm talking places that are going to be getting into triple digits regularly, they underestimate just how much mulch is required to fight that kind of heat. So for an example, you can see we actually have a 4-inch mat of dead cover crop materials covering our winter squash beds that we're preparing right now. And even that is not actually going to be enough as the season continues. I'm gonna have to refresh and replace some of that mulch. Exact same story here in the container garden as well. In fact, mulch is even more important in my container garden. I've left 3 inches of spare room in this pot to replace the wood chips because that is actually a better use of space in this container than more soil for the plant to grow in would have been. It's not an exaggeration to say that wood chip mulch, or whatever mulch you prefer, there's lots of good kinds, but mulch literally enables me to grow food in containers where I live. Without a thick layer of mulch, I simply would not be able to keep up with the watering needs of these plants, even with automated irrigation in place. Probably the single most impactful change we've made to our garden in terms of helping it thrive through the summer season is to start using this thing, the simple garden fork. And by that, I just mean that we have started to decompact and aerate and loosen up our soil between plantings before we actually put those seedlings into the ground. And what that does is it actually helps the plant develop a deeper root system that is more effective at drawing up moisture from the ground. For an example of this, for a concrete example of this, take a look at our zucchini garden. We actually have zucchinis growing in 2 different locations. One, in our main garden that we have been loosening up with a garden fork for a couple of years, where they have a nice big root system. And these plants are not starting to wilt during the day, even though we're already getting into the 90s, because they have that nice big root system where they can draw moisture from. These zucchinis, however, are in our new garden patch where the soil is loose down to maybe a couple of inches. It's not very good soil yet, and we're working on it. Problem is, because those root systems are so shallow, they're not getting enough moisture, and they're already starting to go kind of droopy and wilt during the day, as zucchinis do, as any cucurbits do, because they're not getting that moisture. And you can just see a really clear difference between both of these plants. The tip on this one would be go out there there and grab yourself either a garden fork or a broad fork and just learn to gently decompact that soil before you put your plants into the ground. At some point in your season, you're gonna have to just water as much as required. You're just gonna have to try and keep those plants alive, and that might take a lot of moisture. But until then, it is more effective to water very slowly for a long period of time so that that water gets nice and deep a couple of times a week than it is to water a ton all at once for a short period of time every day. Let me show you why. Here is a bed of very dry compost, and when I absolutely blast this with a ton of water for a couple of minutes, it's gonna look like that compost is totally soaked through. But when I peel it back just a little bit, just peel off the surface, you can see that underneath it is still completely dry. But on the other hand, if I put this hose here on just a trickle and I leave it here for 5 minutes, you're gonna see that it actually penetrates down much, much deeper. And that is what you wanna do in your garden. The trick is not forgetting to turn that hose off. I strongly recommend that you create an alarm to remind yourself, or 2 alarms. Don't ask me how I know. Don't leave that hose on. Alrighty, our last tip of the day, and I feel a little bit strange about suggesting this one because it's one that I don't actually do, but it also happens to be probably the single most effective tip that I can offer you, and that is to employ gardener's shade cloth. Now this right here isn't actually gardener's shade cloth because I got rid of all of mine, and we're gonna get to that in a second, but this is landscape shade cloth, and it functions very similarly. Basically, it is a semi-sheer material that is going to block some percentage of the sun's UV rays from reaching your plants. Now this stuff blocks like 90%. Typically, gardener shade cloth is going to block between 40 to 60% of those UV rays. And that is super, super helpful when you're simply getting too much sun for too long on those plants. So why am I recommending this if it's something I don't actually do myself? Well, because I find this stuff to be a nightmare. First off, it is really expensive. If you have a small garden patch, not a big deal. You can probably get away with spending 15, 20 bucks on it. Well worth it. If you have a big garden, that really starts to add up fast. Second, I just find it such a pain to use. It's difficult to get up, it's difficult to take down, it's difficult to keep up in the wind, it gets dirty, it doesn't look all that nice. I just really don't like using it, so I don't. But the thing is, it is really, really effective. And ultimately, it is what the pros turn to when they just need their farms, when they need their market gardens to be productive in the face of those super hot summer days. And that is all we've got for today, but it's not all we've got in general because I am absolutely going to be making more videos on this same topic in the future. So subscribe if this is something you are interested in. And if you wouldn't mind, do me a favor and go ahead and leave your favorite hot weather gardening tips and techniques and tricks in the comments so we can all learn from you and your experience as well. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this. I hope to see you on the next video. And until then, as always, happy gardening, y'all.